Okay. So welcome back everybody to the Spring 2019 Community Building Institute. Again, my name's Callie Foster. I'm the program specialist with Montana Campus Compact and I am your host. Today we are on session number 2, which is called Evaluation for Everyday Use with Kate Chapin. Kate, would you like me to give you an introduction or would you like to do it yourself?
I can introduce myself.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I just have one more housekeeping item. I sent something through the chat. If you have not done so already, please enter your name in the chat box for attendance reasons. All right, Kate, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that this next hour that you walk away with some real tangible ideas and skills for implementing evaluation in the agencies that you're serving. Let's see, can everyone, I'm assuming that you can hear me okay, and I'm just going to keep rolling around here. Let me just leave this. Throughout this presentation, I will be using the chat box, and so I'll try to keep my eye towards the chat box and really want to make this as interactive as possible. So first, I want to just say thank you to you all. I know that the work that you're doing in agencies through the National Service members, Senior Corps, AmeriCorps, Vista, all the work that you're doing in your agencies is critical. And I know that, you know, I've worked in nonprofits, and I can say that the work of Vistas is really critical. It's really important, and so just really glad that you're able to dedicate the time to serving nonprofits and other agencies across Montana and beyond. So this next hour, specifically what the plan is I'm going to give you a little bit of background information about conducting program evaluations. Like you can see on the title, it's presentation is called Evaluation for Everyday Use. And so again, my hope is that you walk away excited about the process and the product of evaluations, but that you also walk away with some easy to access evaluation tools in your tool belt. So specifically, I'll address why we evaluate, what is evaluation, what are some of the challenges to program evaluations. I'm going to present to you a framework for evaluations. We'll discuss specific strategies, and then I'll leave you with some additional resources. So I want to apologize. I'm like probably many of you, I'm battling the winter cold here. So I hopefully have some tea, water, cough drops, so hopefully I can keep my cough under control here. So a little bit about who I am. So I currently serve as the Director of Field Education for the University of Montana School of Social Work. And in this role, in terms of evaluation, I'm responsible for evaluating the program and reporting on how well students are meeting their learning goals. Formerly, I directed campus and community-based programs for survivors of interpersonal violence. And in these programs, we received grant funding. So there were specific outcomes that we're reporting on. So yes, client satisfaction, but also we interviewed stakeholders. We did pre and post tests for every presentation evaluation that we did to be able to monitor our success in changing attitudes. I'm currently, recently was the principal investigator for an implementation evaluation for a Healthy Montana teen parent program run out of the Flathead City County Health Department. And I'm currently working on a workforce assessment that has sort of features of evaluation within that. And then also I'm working on a performance assessment for a local agency here. So I'm a big believer in evaluations as a strategy for really improving both our program effectiveness and also our program efficiency. All right. So first I want to talk about why we evaluate. So in our roles in nonprofits, we're often asked to do more with less, and program evaluation takes additional time. So why do we do it? We do it because it helps to improve our programs. It helps us to understand if a program isn't effective, how it can be improved. It helps us identify which activities should be continued and built upon and which should be modified or even eliminated. It improves staff performance. So through evaluation, we can identify what are some of the strengths and also our opportunities for improvement among our staff. It demonstrates to funders and to others that your program is impactful. So every agency relies on external funding sources, so whether it's from grants or foundations or private donors. And most of these sources will ask us to report on our successes. Did we say what we said we're going to do? And how well did we do it? And so evaluation helps us to be able to demonstrate and communicate our impact. It also helps us provide clarity and consensus around our purpose so that board members, staff members, volunteers, stakeholders, funders, and community members at large, so that we're all on the same page around our purpose. Program evaluation can be used to raise additional money for your program because you're able to sort of say, hey, what we're doing is effective. So this presentation will focus on formative evaluation. And formative evaluation is essentially, it is an ongoing evaluation for programs in progress. So versus summative evaluations, which occur after a program has ended to measure its success. So formative evaluations, that's a good thing. That means that we're not to the end of our grant funding cycle, for example, and learn information that might have improved our course of action. We can get input along the way so that we can adjust the sort of where our ship is headed. And so I like this little cartoon. The feedback that this little dog got was bad dog, right? And he says, I'm going to need more specific feedback on my formative assessment, right? So how am I a bad dog, and how can I improve? I teach classes at the university as part of my role, and I always, I appreciate the opportunity at the end of the semester to get evaluations and sort of figure out how I can improve it for the future, the times that I teach the course in the future. However, it doesn't really help the students that I'm teaching in the moment. And so I do make a point of doing kind of a formative evaluation midway through the semester because I want to make sure that I can get the feedback, make some adjustments so that the students who are giving me feedback can benefit from those adjustments. So again, a little more on formative evaluation. So again, in general, it monitors progress towards objectives. It provides information to improve the program, right? So it's not just bad dog, it's you were bad because you were barking a lot, right? So it gives us specific, we want to ask evaluative questions that give us specific information about how we can improve. It helps identify issues of interest, right? So such as what is the community interested in seeing in terms of program impact. Helps us refine our data collection activities. And again, clarifies the program's strengths and limitations. So you may run into, roadblocks trying to implement program evaluations. So I want to share with you a list of concerns that I've heard along the way, but I also I'll create some time for you to share as well. So one concern that people have sometimes with conducting evaluations is this idea that evaluations divert resources away from the program and therefore harms participants. Like I said in the beginning, we're often asked to do more with less. And so, there's this concern that if we do one more thing, that's going to erode our ability to effectively serve our clients. And this is a concern. It's a valid concern. And my response to that concern is that evaluation, really done well, helps us determine what does and does not work in a program. And so it's actually beneficial to program participants. So without an evaluation, providing services with little or no evidence that they actually work is a waste of our time. So I think about my course evaluations, right? I take the time in the middle of the course to get that feedback. Yes, it may take a little time from lecture or other class activities, but it's valuable so that I can make sure that I'm creating and sharing a course with my students that's most impactful. Another concern is that it increases the burden for program staff. So it's often program staff are the ones that are responsible for collecting evaluation information because they're most familiar with and have the most contact with program participants. And so this can increase the burden that staff, but the response is that staff can really benefit greatly from an evaluation process because it provides information that can help them improve their work with participants, learn more about what participants' needs are, and really also validate their successes. Also, the burden can be decreased somewhat by incorporating some of the evaluation activities into ongoing program activities, right? We, at all of our house meetings, we do once a month, we share these, we give out surveys, and this is just part of our process of how we do business. All right, thirdly, there's a concern that evaluation is too complicated. So, excuse me, program managers often reject this idea of conducting evaluation because they don't know how to do it or whom to ask for help. And there are technical aspects of evaluations that can be complex, but the evaluation process itself is pretty simple, and chances are program managers are already doing it on an informal basis. So for example, you're figuring out whether the program objectives are being met, which aspects of the program work, and which ones are not effective. And so, like I shared some of the evaluations I'm working on right now. So one of them was with a program in town where they received federal funding. And part of the kind of the deal with receiving this funding is that they also needed an external evaluator to come in and do a performance assessment. Well, that is a strategy that a lot of agencies either choose to or are mandated to do. But the reality is some of the things that I'm going to share with you today are things that they're everyday tools that you can implement right away, and they don't require an external evaluator. And then lastly, there's a concern that evaluation may produce negative results and lead to information that will make the program look bad or lose funding. Well, it's true. You can do an evaluation that reveals problems in accomplishing the work that you set out to do. But, you know, with that, it will probably also reveal successes. And both types of information are significant. So the discovery of problems shouldn't be viewed as evidence of program failure, but rather as an opportunity to learn and improve the program. So information on both problems and successes, it not only helps your program, but it also helps other programs learn and improve. So when evaluation results are used for accountability purposes, for example, to make sure we're doing what we said we're doing and that we're effective, that evaluation can support you to be effective in sort of meeting those goals. So I'm in my office right now, and I have a quote written on my board which says, "Even when things aren't working, we're learning." And I truly believe that. My early days was spent as a river guide and a river runner, and there's this if you're running rapids, there's some rapids that you get out and you scout and you make sure that you know where the obstacles are, and the consequences are high, and so you get out of your boat to scout, right? And then there's some rapids where you do what's called read and run, right? You figure it out as you go along, you read the water. And I think about some of these everyday evaluation tools as sort of being reading and running, right? Making sure that, we're navigating as we go along, we're collecting evidence and information about where we need to turn the raft. And even if we were to get stuck on a rock, for example, to go on my river rafting analogy, we're learning, right? There's a rock there, and we need to next time, execute our plan earlier. So, I think there's some value in having that sort of spirit of adventure with sort of program management, but also evaluation. All right, so I want to hear from you. Share with me in, I guess, two things, because I forgot to ask you this. I would love to know where you're at right now, what agency you're working at, and if it's in Montana or outside of Montana, let me know that. And then if you could share with me any other concerns that you've heard in terms of implementing or doing program evaluations. So again, in the chat box, let me know where you're at, and then let's see. Okay, cool. So we've got Ohio Campus Compact Development Director, awesome. Montana After School Alliance based in Helena. HRDC in Bozeman, results of the evaluations are hard to read. I want to speak to that in a second. FAST Blackfeet, Browning. We've got some awesome students from Browning in our social work program. MSU Bozeman Office of Student Engagement. Maine Campus Compact. Gallatin Valley Food Bank. Good. So Stephanie says, I'm developing a new program, working to identify what evaluation needs to look like. What are we measuring? What's valuable? How to measure? Great. Okay, good. So it's great to have not only Montana partners, but also partners from across the country. I want to just speak to the results are hard to, what was the question? Okay. Results are hard to interpret. So that is a really good point, and one that I hope I want to bring up is that we want to make sure when we're designing our evaluation that we test our surveys, we test our focus groups, because what we think might be a clear question might not be interpreted well among our population, and therefore the results that we get back can be skewed. So there's a lot of emphasis that you need to put on the evaluation design. And then someone brings up kids and how to engage them, and we're going to be talking about, I have a really awesome example about engaging kids in evaluations. Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna keep rolling here. So again, what we're trying to do here is cultivate a spirit of program improvement, right? So one guy's saying, we've got it wrong in the past, and then the little lady's here saying, but we've learned and we know how to do it right in the future. So kind of along with my read and run analogy, or my even when we fail, we're learning, it's really important that we're cultivating that spirit of program improvement in what we're doing. And then another quote here, Yogi Berra, baseball player, coach from the 40s and 60s. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to know when you get there, right? And so we're not just aimlessly implementing programs. We're trying to be strategic and make sure that once we get we continuously seek feedback so that we can adjust the course of our raft, so to speak. I'm just going with this rafting analogy. It's making the winter seem more manageable right now, I guess. All right. So next I want to talk about a framework for evaluation. So I'm going to share with you, there's different frameworks that can be used. I'm going to share with you this framework from the Center for Disease Control, and it's so the CDC, and it's used to evaluate public health programs. And you'll see that in this framework, there's 5 different aspects of it. So 1 is engaging stakeholders, 2 is being able to describe the program, 3 is focusing the evaluation design, 4 is gathering credible evidence, excuse me, and 5 is justifying the conclusions. And then we do it all over again. Here's another way to look at it, right? Engaging stakeholders, focusing, collecting data, analyzing, interpreting, and then using. So I'm going to talk about each of these individually. All right, so the first step, according to the CDC model, is engaging stakeholders. So when we think about who are our stakeholders, we think about them in these 3 different categories, and there may be some overlap with this as well. But first, there are those that are involved in your program operations. So these are your sponsors, your collaborators, your coalition partners, funding officials, administrators, your managers, your staff. And then secondly, there are those that are affected by your programs. So those that you serve, so your clients, family members, neighborhood organizations, academic institutions, elected officials, advocacy groups, even your skeptics, your opponents, right? And it can also be your staff in your agency or even competing agencies. And then the third category is the primary users of the evaluation. So the specific people that are in a position to do or decide something regarding the program, right? So we often think of these as your program administrators. So I want to hear from you all. Who are your stakeholders? If you were to think about the agencies that you work in, who are some of the folks that you're going to need to engage with that fit in these categories? And again, use the chat box. Board of directors, great. Universities, college CEOs, presidents, AmeriCorps members, steering committees, who are your fiscal sponsors, students, campuses, funders, community partners, community members, parks, friends, groups, park managers, student veterans center, young Blackfeet adults, mental health providers, hospital staff, Commission on Aging, health centers, librarians, board of directors, community members, school children on field trips. Pretty cool. Okay, great. So it sounds like from your chat, the chat contributions, that you have a good sense of your stakeholders. And I want to give you just an example of a program I worked with and what were some of our stakeholders. So I was a partner on a study, a feasibility study, looking at green care farms in the United States. So I worked with a colleague of mine, and essentially green care farms are they're working farms where adults with disabilities engage in activities ranging from feeding and caring for animals to harvesting vegetables and preparing fresh meals. And essentially kind of how this project started is that there are agencies that some of you might actually work in, home and community-based agencies, which are care options for adults with disabilities or for older adults who might have some limitations. And so these day centers are where adults can be at for the day to kind of get them out of home and engage with other people. Well, these farms are an alternative to going to an adult day center. And so we were looking at the feasibility of this first green care farm in the United States. And so in this example, we interviewed a variety of stakeholders, so including the administrators of that traditional home and community-based services program, also the adult day service programs. We interviewed farmers' families. We interviewed the participants of the program that are using these they're participating in these green care farms, and then also family members of participants, because we wanted to see, based on their interactions with their family members, are they noticing any change in terms of their quality of life due to their engagement in this program. So that's just a everyday example there. All right, so we talked about the first one, which is the engaging stakeholders, and then next I want to talk about describing the program. And what I want to talk about here is logic models. And some of you, and I could probably do a whole day or definitely a whole webinar, maybe a whole day on conducting logic model. And I want to just give you just kind of whet your palate for this. And because I think it can be a really helpful model to really identify what it is we're doing and what's the impact of what we're doing. A logic model is sort of like a roadmap, and it helps you plan your route. So if we say that this is what our outcome is, what are the resources and activities that are helping us meet our program goals? A logic model provides this common language, so it helps us differentiate between what we do, right? We provide educational programs for parents and what our intended results are or outcomes, right? So why are we doing these educational programs? We want to increase a better understanding for parents of children 0 to 5 in terms of developmental milestones that are important to support, right? And then it also helps us increase our understanding of our program, right? What it is we're doing, what are the resources that we have to do it, and what's our impact. It helps us identify what are the important variables to measure. Someone mentioned in the chat room that, you know, what is it that I should be measuring? What do I evaluate? And so this can help you get specific about what are the areas that you want to, what can you evaluate, what can you measure, so that you can use your evaluation resources wisely. So let's give you an everyday example. So the problem that we're dealing with here is hunger, okay? And so the activity that we'll do is to address this problem is get food. And the activity that we do is eating the food. And the result, the intended result, is we will feel better, right? So what we're addressing here, the problem is hunger. The resources are food. The activity is eating the food. And the outcome is feeling better. That's pretty easy, right? So let's look at an example. This is a parent education program in the logic model. So the situation and the problem they're addressing, similar to hunger, is that during a county needs assessment, a majority of parents reported that they were having difficulty parenting, felt stressed as a result. So the inputs, right? The inputs or resources, those are what are the things that are considered essential for a program's activity to occur, right? In order for us to put a parent education program together, we need to have staff, we need to have money to pay the staff, and we need to have partners because we're bringing in partners to help us with some of the educational content. Now, outputs are what a program-specific activities will create or produce. So providing evidence of services, right? So through the use of staff, money, and partners, we are assessing parent ed programs. We're going to design and deliver evidence-based programs through 8 sessions. We're going to facilitate support groups. And these are going to be for parents of 3 to 10-year-olds they're going to attend. So when you think about some of the outputs, right, those are your activities. So the circle is the activity, and those are the specific actions that make up your intervention. And then moving over to outcomes, these are the specific changes that may result from your program's activity or intervention. So oftentimes people will break this into short-term, medium-term, long-term outcomes. And so examples on this one is that parents will increase their knowledge of child development. Parents will understand their own parenting style. They'll gain new ways to parent. They'll gain confidence. And so then on the evaluation side of things, so if these are our outcomes that parents will increase our knowledge, then we're probably going to need to implement a pre and a post-test, pre-test before our educational programs and a post-test afterwards to be able to see if there's a change in knowledge based on our training. So when you're thinking about these logic models, you can think about them having 2 sides. The process side, which focuses on the program's implementation and its planned work. So that's the inputs, the resources, the activities, the outputs, and then the outcomes side, which really looks at those terms. All right, so again, outcomes piece, we want to start with an end in mind. So based on our educational programming for parents, what do we want them to get out of the program, right? And what can we measure? And we want to know, like, is our program making a difference? What works and what doesn't work? And how are we going to know if it's effective? All right, so I want you to use the chat box here, and I'd like you to think about inputs, okay? what are the activities, what are your inputs, what are your resources that you and your agency invests in? So again, use the chat box to say, for your agency, what are you investing in? Time, so staff time, volunteers, and funding. Good. What else? What are your other inputs? Books, good. Books, curriculum programs, volunteers, employment and labor projects. So you probably want to be a little more specific with that one. Buses, drivers, gas, outreach, advertising, programs, support efforts, facilities. Again, you want to be specific about that. Okay. Good. Educational materials, good. That's specific. Outreach. It's probably, and so when you're thinking, again, we're going upstream. So what are the resources that we invest in so that we can have these outputs, right? So think now, move into outputs. What are the activities? What is it that you do? And who do you want to reach, right? So again, your educational programs for parents of children 0 to 10. So again, use the chat box to share what are the activities and who are the participants. So you might say producing educational materials for college-age students. Library programs, okay, and then you want to be specific for whom. Who are your library programs for? For the community at large, for a specific subset of the community. Good. Environmental education for school-age children. Good. And then you, with that environmental education, you can even be more specific. So after-school programs, summer programming, those sorts of things. Interpretive programs for the public. Okay, so which subset of the public? Public at large, or is it retirees, or is it good? Interactive story times for preschool age children. Awesome. So interpretive programs, okay, good. Educational programming for children, usually 3rd through 5th grade. Water access for local community members. Women student veterans, participating in a race and forming a peer support group. So again, that's going to be your activity would be a peer support group for women veterans. Technical training for AmeriCorps programs, good. And then you could even tease out what does technical training look like. And then, okay, good. Outdoor jobs for Blackfeet adults, awesome. So you might even say kind of what is your, so if you're doing employment outreach, what does that look like? You would probably also be engaging with employers. Geology and paleo programs for elementary and middle school students. Okay, these are awesome examples. Okay. All right, so now let's go on to that. If we were divided into 2 pieces, right? The inputs and activities or outputs, and then the outcomes. Let's focus on outcomes. So you're putting all this hard work into developing and implementing programs. What for, right? Why are you doing this work? What are the short-term results that you're looking for, the medium and long-term results? And use the chat room to share your ideas. And try to be specific if you can. Increase stewardship behaviors. Okay, good. So you'd have to really outline what are those stewardship behaviors that you're looking for. High school classes registering for programs. That would be easy to measure. Gain information about cave formation. Interesting. Women student veterans are connected to each other, right? So that's decreasing social isolation, increasing connection, and they have able to voice, maybe advocate for themselves on challenges and their need for education success. Very cool. Long-term outcomes include decreasing chronic disease rates or suicide rates in the area. So that's also obviously something you can measure, and maybe thinking about short-term outcomes could be increasing referrals to helping agencies. helping seniors, disabled people who are disabled in Bozeman reach the destinations they need to within the community. So that's, again, looking at mobility and access to services. Short-term decreased stigma around mental health, right? So then you're thinking about, if that's what I want to do, how am I going to measure whether there's changes in that stigma? The medium is to increase referrals to mental health services. And then the long-term is decreased suicide rate. So I might even say on that one, the short term would be increasing referrals to mental health services, and the long term is decreasing stigma. Or that could be maybe in parallel with one another, because you're going to be able to measure referrals much more easily than you are going to be able to measure decrease in stigma. Reading skills on preschool kids. Long term as they become lifelong readers. That's cool. Okay, y'all are really involved in some excellent programs. More use and appreciation for our park. So again, you're thinking about, how do we measure, what does appreciation look like, and how do we measure this? So any questions about logic models in general? So again, your agency may have this already, and this would be a good opportunity for you to ask about it. If not, you might be able to partner with someone to put this on paper so that you can get more clearer. And this is, again, we could spend all day talking about this. Okay, it looks like we might have a question. Oh, more ideas here. Hand out discount passes for family. June month at the library programs, and gain attendance from families at the cavern. Cool, that's a thing you can definitely measure. Okay. Great examples here. Okay, let's keep rolling here. All right, so we talked about and now we're moving, so we talked about describing the program and using the logic model to really get clear about what it is we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what's our intended impact, and what are the resources we have to meet our goals, our outcomes, right? So now we want to think about focusing the design. So again, it's informed by the logic model. So what is it that I got clear about in terms of our program from the logic model process? What data can I collect, right? So if I am talking about numbers, right? So the amount of people that are accessing the library, the amount of people that are engaged, women veterans that are engaged in this program, you can definitely collect that. But you also want to think about, what are ways that I might be able to demonstrate not only number, but also impact? What's feasible to collect in terms of data? What's ethical? What's useful? What's the purpose? Right? When you're designing a program evaluation, you're thinking of why? What am I getting? What's my purpose here? And what am I going to use the information for? And what's my timeline? Right? We know that so many agencies are burdened and are the expectations to do more with do less. So we want to be smart about our focus design, or the design of our evaluation. All right, so let's talk about collecting data. So you all probably know this from your research classes in school, that we think about data in terms of quantitative or qualitative data. Quantitative data, these are the data that's numerical, that can be counted, quantified, mathematically analyzed. And so examples of that are number of people that we serve, the number of services that we provided, and the length of services. We can get this through surveys, through sign-in sheets, through assessments, through test scores, those sorts of things. And quantitative data can be numeric, it's easily ordered, and it's summarized. And then the second type is qualitative data. And so that's narrative information that describes the experience of program recipients. This is a lot of where we get sort of the heart and soul of our program, right? The impact. It can provide us this insight and the context about attitudes or knowledge, change in attitudes or behaviors and knowledge, change in the perspective of our stakeholders. And there are many ways that we can collect data. And so I'll use the next slide to elaborate on that. So when we think about collecting data, we can do, and there's pros and cons with all of this, right? Is we can do surveys. And surveys can be disseminated electronically, right? You've seen Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey. There's some really good tools where we can design a survey, disseminate it to many people, and have software that helps us to collect and analyze the data. Surveys are often used in sort of pre and post tests. So if we want to be able to demonstrate a change in knowledge from before our programming to after our programming, surveys are a great way to do it. They can be a quick and efficient way of getting the information out and can cover a wide range of topics. And some of the cons is that a high response rate can be difficult to achieve, but a high response rate is needed to ensure the quality of the data that's used for kind of some of the big kind of programs, data analysis programs. And then surveys that rely on close-ended questions like yes, no, choose A, B, or C, they sometimes will lack the in-depth information on a topic. You may see surveys where they have more of a mixed method approach. So it might ask you close-ended questions, A, B, or C, yes, no, and then give you the option to elaborate on your responses. And that's where you're asking those open-ended questions where you might be able to pull out themes as well. And I would say with surveys, one of the key things is that once I'm working on a survey right now, and I'm kind of looking at other examples and pulling together some ideas, and I know that I'm going to put something down on paper that makes sense in my brain, and then I'm going to test it, and it's not going to make sense to other people. So really important that before you launch a survey that you make sure that you test it with colleagues and with other folks that may not be as embedded in the work, so that you can make sure that what you're asking makes sense. Because when questions aren't clear in surveys, your data will be skewed, or there's concern that you will have skewed data. And so you want to make sure that you take the time to test the surveys. So focus groups are a really cool way to obtain information on varying opinions and perspectives in a short period of time. And so, for example, you might be I'm going to use your example you provided, working with female veterans, or working with adults in the Browning community. And so you would invite people to come together for an hour, for example, and share their perspectives on it. And this is a really great way to get at some of the thoughts and perspectives, and to be able to identify themes and pull people together. And I love doing focus groups. The downside is it does require someone who is a skilled facilitator, and you need to be conscientious that you want to stay on track in terms of the questions or the tasks that you have. Like, my task is to ask these 5 questions. Typically, focus groups are recorded, and so you want to make sure that if you do record a focus group, that you do your due diligence and making sure you engage in that informed consent process. And then transcribing focus groups, that does take time. I think I heard recently like an hour of transcription, of recording of your audio recording of your interview or your focus group, that can take up to 4 hours to transcribe it, right? So there's definitely pro cons. I think it can be used with survey, a really nice way to get at some really good themes, capture some good quotes that can be used with your reports, but just kind of have to make sure you have the time and resources to be able to do that. And then sort of document review is referred to as that secondary data. So what is it that you currently have in your possession that you can use to inform your evaluation? So for example, I'm working on a performance assessment, and one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is the narrative reports that they sent out to their funders. So I think that's going to be really important. I want to know, what are they saying that the program is doing? I'm also going to look at their policies and procedures and see if there's anything in there that might support program implementation or might hinder program implementation. And so using secondary data can be a really time-efficient way to do a program evaluation. All right. Any questions on data collection before I move forward to some specific examples. Okay, so again, and this is my bias, but I think a mixed method approach where I'm using both qualitative and quantitative data is really helpful, because if I'm just saying, here's the numbers that we served, without really saying, here's the impact on the populations that we served, I'm really going to be limited in my results, right? So we want to focus more on lives changed and conditions improved rather than just on numbers served. And you can collect this data, I think, in a mixed method approach where you're looking at both qualitative and quantitative data. So let's look at some creative ways to capture some data. So you may be familiar with photo voice, and it's a process in which people, typically those people with limited power due to poverty or language barriers or ability, race, class, gender, culture, or any other circumstance, might have limited power or limited voice. And so photo voice is a way of capturing these voices in a way, or via photos or videos, as a way for them to advocate for themselves, so a way for them to share aspects of their environment or their experiences that they may not otherwise be able to demonstrate. And so it's a tool used, again, to give voice to those that we often silence, to enable them to record and reflect on their experiences or their community conditions, both the positive and the negative. You've heard, this idea that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so seeing what someone else sees is a really powerful way to tell a story. And so much of evaluation is about telling a story. And through photo voice, it can be an effective means of advocating need for a change that may be more impactful or more effective than just words alone. So here I have an example. This is, our community through the eyes of people with spinal cord injury. So again, folks with spinal cord injury are given not only cameras, but also training on taking pictures. And then this is used, you can use it with policymakers, for example, legislators, as a way of saying, hey, here's an issue that needs to be addressed. This is another example of working with kids. And then it has here, photo voice is a form of community-based participatory research. So community-based participatory research is where folks who have the lived experience are the researchers, right? And so photo voice is oftentimes a tool used with CBPR. So they use photography to share and show how the youth in this area see their community. All right, so kids. So one of you mentioned that you work with kids, and so one of your questions is, how do you engage kids? So I've got permission to share this evaluation from a bachelor in social work student of mine from a couple years ago. So she did her practicum with the Missoula Food Bank, and she was tasked with the challenge of getting feedback from kids on a program that they have. I think it's called Kids Count, I think. And it is where the Missoula Food Bank partners with after-school programs to give kids food. And so she wanted to find out whether the food that they were offering, if kids liked it, if they were eating it, or what feedback that they had. So she was given that challenge by her supervisor. She showed up an after-school program. Anyone that has kids or work with kids knows that time right after school, it's like mayhem, craziness. Kids are have been controlled and contained all day, and so they just want to be wild and free. And so she went to try to interview kids, and it was not working at all. She was not able to capture any sort of interview process with the kids. So she came up with an idea about a really quick and easy survey that is appropriate for kids. So she asked them on a piece of paper, how hungry do you feel after school? Not hungry, a little hungry, really hungry. How hungry do you feel after eating the snack? And then do you bring snacks home later to eat? So all of these questions, right, she thought about, okay, what is it that we need to know to inform our program, right? So if kids are super hungry, we need to make sure we have a lot of food available. If they're hungry after they're eating the snack, we need to provide more food. And if they bring snacks home to eat later, which is fine, then they need to provide even more food. And then she wanted to get a sense of what are the foods they like and don't like. So circle the food you like, circle the food you don't like, right? I would be surprised if kids were like circling those that broccoli over there, but maybe. And so she's really, through this feedback through this survey from the kids, they were able to make sure that they were providing food that kids actually like to eat. Pretty cool. All right, so then the next process in the CDC framework is we've designed our survey, we've gathered our data, so now we need to analyze, interpret the data. So a couple things to think about when you're interpreting your data is creating a timeline. So once we get the data, how often will we look at it? Will we do this monthly, quarterly, yearly? And what do we learn, and then what are the limitations from the data that we gathered, right? So this is part of your research design or your evaluation design is that you want to make sure that you have a process. There's nothing more annoying than going through the process, I think, of going through an evaluation and then having data and then never looking at the data. I was like, well, what was the point of that? So for an example, I worked at helps with some evaluation at a domestic violence shelter where folks were there for I think 60 days. And so we wanted to make sure that we got feedback on their shelter experiences, but also respecting the confidentiality of the people that were currently in the shelter. So what we decided is every quarter, we would do the evaluation or the survey, but we wouldn't open it until the next quarter. And that way we would be able to respect the anonymity of the people that were in the shelter, or at least, not anonymity, confidentiality, but we would have a plan in order to use that feedback, interpret it, and then the next slide we'll talk about using it. So learning from the evaluation, how do we improve our program? How do we improve its process? So there are many ways that you can communicate your findings. So you can create, and some funders or some agencies might want you to create a formal report, which usually has a literature review, your evaluation design, desired outcomes, logic model, data collection, results, and then recommendations or the actions that you've taken as a result of the data. And the chances are that only a handful of people will read that. So what I really recommend is also creating like a one-pager that highlights that information. And I'll give you some examples of that. You can also use the data to create stories, case studies, or stories of impact. So again, we're humanizing our data. You can use them for news releases. You can do snapshots, postcards, even videos where you might put on your website where you're recording interviews with your organizational leaders discussing how the evaluation improved the organization. And videos, they can be uploaded for free on YouTube, hosted on the website. And again, a great way to show your funders that you're a learning, growing organization. And then you want to think about who is going to benefit from our results, right? When we go back to your stakeholders, you're thinking about board and staff, potential or current funders, partners, potential partners, community leaders. I'm a visual person. I like these one-pagers. This is from a work training program that talks about the people that have been served by the program and the program impact. Right, so they share not only the numbers here, but also the impact they earn. People who participate in the program earn $1.70 more per hour. And here's an example of the teen parent program that I did, and that gave an idea of there's probably a lot of, maybe too much text in this, I'm not sure, but gave you a sense of like the program overview, the stages of how teens were interviewed. And then it came up with, based on our feedback, we came up with these, based on the evaluation results, we identified these positive and negative feedback loops, and we put that on the one-pager to demonstrate kind of impact. So that's a lot of information. essentially, here's the model again. Looking at engaging our stakeholders, focusing our design, collecting data, analyzing, interpreting, and then using the data. So that's a lot of information, and you might think, like, where the heck do I start? Well, I think the logic model is a really important place to start because it helps you get clear about what you're doing, what are your resources, what are your outcomes, and then how can you measure those outcomes. And then I also encourage folks to get creative, right? I mean, I think Photo Voice, excuse me, and the Kids Count one are really creative ways. I mean, so what are feasible, usable data you can collect in a creative way? Excuse me. And then here's some resources. Excuse me, I'll share this PowerPoint with you all. Any questions? All right. Well, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
All right. Well, thank you, Kate, again for presenting this session. I also wanted to say, if you have not entered your name in the chat box yet, please go ahead and do that. And Kate, if you're still there, would you mind if I provided these slides to our participants? Okay. Great. So everyone, look for that in an email from me. I will also be sending out another recap email this afternoon, and I am still working on retrieving the recording from yesterday due to all the Zoom difficulties that I had at the end. But please stay tuned for that and look for a recap email from me. And if no one has any other questions for Kate, I think we can sign off about 3 minutes early. Okay, well, if no one has any other questions, thank you for coming, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.